Imagine spending thousands of dollars to bring an ancient Egyptian mummy home, only to invite your friends over, unwrap it for entertainment, grind parts of it into medicine, and even use it to make paint. That sounds like something from a dark comedy. But for many Victorians, it was perfectly normal. In the 1800s, Britain became obsessed with ancient Egypt. Wealthy collectors bought mummies, doctors prescribed products made from them, artists painted with pigments derived from them, public audiences gathered to watch them being unwrapped. The strange question is, why? Why would one of the most educated societies in history become fascinated with the remains of people who had died thousands of years earlier? The short answer is that Victorians didn't see mummies the way we do, and once you understand their worldview, their bizarre obsession starts to make a surprising amount of sense. To understand the mummy craze, we have to start with the Victorians themselves. The 19th century was an age of discovery. New railways connected cities, steamships crossed oceans, scientific knowledge expanded rapidly. The British Empire stretched across much of the globe. There was a widespread belief that the world could be explored, catalogued, collected, and understood, and few places captured the Victorian imagination more than Egypt. For centuries, Egypt had been seen as mysterious. Its pyramids, temples, and hieroglyphs seemed almost supernatural. Then everything changed. European expeditions began uncovering enormous amounts of Egyptian artifacts. Archaeologists, collectors, travelers, and adventurers flooded into the region. Suddenly, ancient Egypt felt real. And most importantly, it felt accessible. You could buy a mummy. Today, that sounds unbelievable. But in the Victorian era, thousands of artifacts were removed from Egypt and shipped to Europe. Mummies became collector's items. Museums wanted them. Universities wanted them. Private collectors wanted them. Owning a mummy became a status symbol, a way of demonstrating wealth, education, and sophistication. But the obsession went much further than collecting. For centuries, Europeans had believed in a substance called mumia. Originally, the term referred to a bitumen-like material associated with preserved bodies. Over time, however, many people began believing that actual mummified human remains possessed medicinal properties. The logic sounds bizarre today. But remember the world they lived in. Medicine was still developing. Germ theory was only beginning to gain acceptance. Many treatments that seem absurd now were considered legitimate science at the time. If ancient bodies had survived for thousands of years, some people reasoned, perhaps they contained powerful healing qualities. So powdered mummy was sold as medicine. This wasn't primarily because Victorians were unusually cruel. It was because they trusted what they believed was established medical knowledge. Many of the people purchasing these products weren't trying to do something shocking. They thought they were being rational. And that's a pattern that appears throughout history. People often make decisions based on the best information they believe they have available. But perhaps the strangest expression of the mummy craze was the mummy unwrapping party. Yes, that was a real thing. Victorian audiences would gather while an expert slowly removed the wrappings from a mummy. Sometimes these events took place in lecture halls. Sometimes they happened in private homes, part science demonstration, part social gathering, part entertainment. To modernize, it feels disrespectful. But many Victorians saw it differently. Remember, this was an age obsessed with discovery. Opening a mummy was viewed as revealing a lost chapter of history. People felt they were uncovering secrets that had been hidden for thousands of years. The mummy wasn't simply a dead body. It was a historical artifact, a puzzle waiting to be solved. This points to something deeper. The Victorian fascination wasn't really about mummies. It was about knowledge. Every mummy represented a connection to a civilization that seemed both ancient and advanced. Egypt had built monuments that still amazed engineers. Its history stretched back farther than almost any civilization familiar to Europeans. Victorians were fascinated by the idea that they could literally hold history in their hands. and mummies became the ultimate symbol of that connection. But if these practices seem so obviously strange, why didn't people object? Why wasn't there widespread outrage? The answer lies in how Victorians viewed the past. Today, many people see ancient human remains as deserving protection and respect. But those attitudes developed gradually. In the 19th century, human remains were frequently collected, displayed, studied, and exhibited. Museums showcased skeletons. Medical schools dissected bodies. Anthropologists gathered human remains from around the world. The idea that ancient remains should be left untouched simply wasn't a widespread assumption. There was also the influence of empire. Britain was one of the most powerful nations on earth. Many Victorians assumed they had the right to study, collect, and possess artifacts from other cultures. That belief shaped everything from archaeology to museum collections. The mummy craze didn't emerge in isolation. It grew from a broader worldview that saw the world as something to be explored, classified, and brought under human understanding. Ironically, many Victorians genuinely admired ancient Egypt. They weren't trying to destroy its legacy. Quite the opposite, they were fascinated by it. They read books about it. They decorated homes with Egyptian-inspired designs. They filled museums with Egyptian artifacts. The problem was that admiration and respect didn't always mean the same thing they mean today. The obsession even entered the art world. For years, a pigment known as mummy brown was sold to artists. Stories spread that it was made using ground mummy remains. Whether every batch actually contained human remains is debated, but the belief itself reveals something remarkable. Victorians were so accustomed to using mummies in everyday life that many barely questioned it. So why did Victorians eat Egyptian mummies? The answer isn't that they were uniquely strange. It's that they inhabited a very different world, a world where medicine worked differently, where archaeology was still young, where empires moved artifacts across continents, where ancient remains were viewed as scientific resources rather than protected cultural heritage, and where curiosity often outweighed concerns that seem obvious to us. Today, the idea of consuming, displaying, or casually unwrapping a mummy feels deeply unsettling. But that's what makes this story so fascinating. It reminds us that history isn't filled with villains who thought exactly like us and chose differently. It's filled with people whose assumptions about the world were often completely different from our own. The Victorians looked at a mummy and saw medicine, knowledge, entertainment, status, and discovery. We look at the same mummy and see a human being who lived thousands of years ago. And perhaps the most surprising part of the entire story is how natural each perspective felt to the people who held it. Because one of the easiest mistakes to make in history is assuming that future generations won't look back at some of our own habits with exactly the same sense of disbelief.